Hey guys, welcome to the fourth episode of the Atomic Pod. This is a special episode where we are having a guest appearance by Samit and Kam. These guys run something called as Penseum, which is a fabulous AI product. Let's get to know more about them, about their journey, about what's Penseum and where it's placed. So, David, how are you? How was your week?
I'm doing great, Vinay. It's good to be back. Excited to meet Samit and Kam and hear about Penseum. It looks like they have a really awesome product.
We are also excited to have your dog as a guest. She's
Special
just
guest
gracing your
appearance.
background. Samit, tell us something about you, right? How did you come up with Penseum? How did you and Cam meet each other? Maybe just a quick intro or something, just for our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is an interesting story for sure. How me and Cam met. Well, that's a big one. We essentially met in university, first year of university. I mean, I didn't like him very much the first time we actually met. So that was funny. I was like, who is this guy walking in with like gold headphones and his gym bag into class? Like, I was like, oh my god, all right. But anyways, but then after that, we started talking. We had very like similar like upbringings, a lot of similar experiences, especially in university. Especially working or at least studying engineering. I think we both suffered together. So that's kind of like where we came together. We're like, okay, we're in this boat together. So let's kind of, I guess, bonded over that, bonded over failing our first few exams, things such as that. So it was definitely interesting in that sense. Um, how we came about working together, well, that's also a funny story. I think at the beginning of, well, we graduated university in 2020, which was pre-COVID. So it was interesting times. We were like, what do we do now? And that's also how we kind of started our first business. We were like, we have a lot of time on our hands. Things are going digital. What do we do now? So, I'm more on the design side. So, I was like designing websites. Cam and a few other friends of ours were also there together. And, we would just create websites for people because everybody was like, okay, we need to go online. And then one thing led to another and another. Got bigger websites, bigger contracts to do bigger things. And that's how we started our first business. Um, but again, going back to how me and Cam met, studying engineering, it's not easy. I mean, we did suffer a lot, and we weren't really, well, at least personally, I didn't like the way that we were taught. So that's kind of like for the past 3 years, it's always been on like the back of my head that I need to do something in education. I don't know about Cam, but I think it's come whole like 180. We're going back to kind of university to get things done. So that's where the inspiration behind Pensium came was for students like me and Cam, such as ourselves who like suffer through that. Like we want to make that process better. Like we want studying to be fun, not like something where like, oh man, I have an exam in one day, or like, oh man, I got to stay up all night just to get my work done. So yeah, that's I guess my story.
That is awesome. That is very admirable.
Yeah,
It should be fun to learn new things.
exactly.
Learning new things is cool, but it becomes such a chore because of the structure of everything sometimes. And it's nice that's a really admirable and awesome story. I appreciate you sharing that with us.
For sure, for sure. I don't know about Cam, but Cam, how did you feel?
We came 360 and not 180 Summit. That's why you were failing your first exams in engineering.
I wasn't good at math. I'm sorry. Well, maybe.
But that is pretty much that sums up how we met and why we started Pensium. I'm originally Iranian. I came to Canada when I was 15. So when I look at my education, we're in Iran, my education in Canada, and now I'm in London now, seeing education in London, having friends from all over the world. It kind of taught us the fact that it's the same problem that is in healthcare. When you see something good, something that is that has a social impact, that has high impact for the next generation, and that is key to human success and progression and evolution, being taken as a essentially commodity to make huge profits off of. Maybe it's a little hypocritical for me to say it when I'm making a for-profit in education, but the point is we are trying to be efficient with the resources that we have. Create an atmosphere, create an environment where people can benefit, can become better, become the best version of themselves with as much resource as they have, right? Back in the day, maybe, since the dawn of time, education has been the differentiator between the countries, societies, and essentially communities. The community that spend more money on education essentially would benefit from the effects that it would have for the later generations and later time. So now, with such technologies, with internet connecting us to each other and information being abundant, that differentiator is no longer and can no longer be the case and should no longer be the case. As human, we have to come together and achieve together. So the point of Penseum was that the point of Penseum was create something in education that can bring people together, that maybe, hopefully, this is maybe too ambitious of a goal for a product like Penseum, but maybe we can create peace somewhere in the world, right? Teach people how to be more friendly to each other through a very small domino sort of effect of saying that education needs to be fairly distributed to anyone from any sort of underserved and under kind of notice community. So that was the aim for Penseum in a kind of a nutshell. Where it started from, the fact that I failed exams, the fact that Summit and a lot of people around the world have failed exams just because it was taught in such a way that we wouldn't like to be taught, right? So it started from a small task in that sense, and then we realized, well, it can be bigger, and thus having the vision of democratizing education, which I hate these sort of words, but I have to use these buzzwords, so allow me.
Cool. So, tell us something about Penseum, right? What is Penseum and what is that you guys are doing exactly? And what is the larger problem that you guys want to solve?
Well, Penseum is an AI study tool. What it means is that it uses general LLMs at the moment to take uploaded material from students and turn them into study guides, questions, flashcards, and gives access to a chatbot on the right side of the screen, as you can see, where students can interact with the information and learn more about their area that they're studying. What we've realized is that though there are so many apps, so many tools out there that are doing the same thing, they're providing chat PDF was there and so on and so forth, there are no such app for education, specifically for education, that can streamline this process. Meaning there are 6 proven cognitive methods for students to learn better. We were thinking, take these general LLMs, tweak it a little bit in such a way with graphical interface and obviously with the right information, right fine tuning, so that the user on the other side, being the student, being the educator, or the institutions, can learn better, can comprehend data better, thus having better retention, better engagement. For universities and institutions, it meant lower dropout rates for them. So it is an all-encompassing one solution that can benefit students, it can benefit educators, and it can benefit the institutions as a whole.
Cool. For our listeners, just clearing one thing, this is not a sponsored segment. There are no commercials involved in this. We are just as the Atomic Pod team, me and David, we are just truly fascinated with the level of impact that Penseum has on the world, especially in terms of countries that are very difficult to reach, very difficult to penetrate through a traditional SaaS software. So we just thought that it would be a best use of the screen time on the podcast to give some visibility to Penseum and make sure these guys have a chance to increase their visibility and actually make a bigger impact. So, on the note of the impact, guys, so of course, Pensium being an AI product where you're doing text summarization, I have multiple questions here. So the first one is, first walk us through your tech journey, right? Like how does the tech architecture look like? Like our listeners are mostly tech people who understand AI, who are very excited in the AI space. So for our listeners, walk us through exactly what is happening here. What's the AI play behind this?
That is an amazing question. And again, from our experience, we had to figure out, well, there's a AI craze. What do we use to be not labeled a ChatGPT wrapper? What do we use that we are, that means from a business standpoint, we are in line with our finances? What do we use that our users are happy with, right? We went through numerous open source on Hugging Face, just trying to look at what is available, right? Even before the idea of Penseum. For the past year, tested a bunch of different open source LLMs, and tested a lot of fine tuning, trying to figure out what's best for us. Did a lot of essentially prompt engineering, chain of thoughts, essentially one shot, zero shot, all these sort of different ways of prompting, and then came to a conclusion. Well, at the end of it, for a solution to be, from a business standpoint, worth it, you had to think about, well, if I spend the money to get the proper data, to process the data in such a way that I can fine tune it, to select hyperparameters, to fine tune my LLM. How much manpower, how much time would I spend on this to get an acceptable rate versus what if I go to general purpose and try to do essentially prompt engineering, right? Maybe the prompt engineering a little bit here and there, right? So when we first started, we used the fine-tune model, try to figure out, is it worth it for us? Then actually going to third-party available, likes of ChatGPT, likes of Claude, using their API, trying to see, well, where is the balance, right? Where do we find the balance? We found that initially, going to ChatGPT, going to Claude was worth it for us, even though we had to do a lot of data pre-processing, had to minimize on the tokens as much as possible, so on, making sure that the LLM gave us consistent answers and consistent output so that we could turn them into JSON. Now you can see ChatGPT and OpenAI has produced JSON output, but 6 months ago, we did not have that. A year ago, we did not have that. So you had to create something out of nothing, essentially. So when you look at that, when we had to kind of make that decision, we initially said up until 150,000 users, we have to use third party because it just financially did not make sense. The amount of man hour that goes into fine tuning a model that is as good as a general purpose model and is not as expensive as saying like 150 billion parameter model that costs a fortune to host. We had to go with general purpose, do some fine tuning, do some semantic searching in the, not fine tuning, sorry, essentially prompt engineering, concatenate all that with some semantic search and then get an output. So when we decided to go in that route, we quickly pivoted and used the third party to put our product out. So from making that decision to actually having a product out, it took us 10 days. And that is why I think this AI craze, this AI world, this bubble that people talk about, has been very much a gold mine for developers and anyone who's out there. The point is that your user somewhere is facing some inefficiency in their processes, right? Whether it's a professor, whether it's a student, or whoever is out there, construction as an employee or civil engineer, whoever is out there, they have some sort of inefficiency in their work, right? They are looking for the output. Whether you use a general purpose or you use a fine-tuned model, it doesn't matter. The question becomes on the privacy policy sort of situation, since it's sort of data question. Some people can be endless debates on who owns the data, who owns the IP. But other than that, people are facing inefficiencies where AI can fill that inefficiency. And if you can ship a product out in less than a month, I think that is where this entire world changes upside down and real opportunities show it's in themselves. That was a long way. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's actually a gold mine of information and first-hand business/product development experience, right? Because if you think about it, as a developer, the first thing you're tempted to do, like as an AI enthusiast, you're always tempted to do the most exciting thing. The first thing to do in such a thought process is, let me build my own AI. Let me build my own AI models. Let me have a fully integrated system. Like, even if it costs like a few months in terms of time, let me do that, and then let me go to market. Versus something that you guys suggested, where you created a benchmark, you did some calculations, which was the 150,000 users here. Based on that benchmark, before this benchmark, it's just easier and it's just economically, it makes more sense to use a third-party API. After that, after the user threshold, you can then invest in building something in-house. That's a very lean way of building a startup. So kudos to you guys on actually having this very clear and staying out of your development biases to build something cool at the first day.
Thank you very much. I mean, someone can comment on this a little bit more, but for the past 3 years, we tried to build production level products. I'm not going to sit here and say we were successful, but we tried. And to understand this entire journey. And then what we realized, it's like you are fixing or you are tackling an emotional problem where your customer, your client has, right? That customer is looking for a solution that fixes something in their lives, right? Whether it's they don't want to spend as much time, they can get to their families faster, whatever it is, you're fixing a problem. So someone can talk about the design side, but when we look at a process, when we look at a project, we say to ourselves, what are we trying to do here? What is the point, right? From a business standpoint, from our standpoint, and from our customer standpoint. From our standpoint was this. Well, so many people are going to be shipping out products out there. And if you had millions of dollars, you may be able to fine tune it and you may be 5% better than our platform. But if our platform comes first, right, and we can provide more features with the money that we're saving from fine tuning, we could, adjust that 5% so that we don't have that problem. And we could change our user experience and user interface in such a way that it looks cleaner, it looks more robust, right? So there are some essentially wiggle room here for you to decide whether I'm going to spend the development hour, the manpower that I have in this area, or I'm going to spend on this area. And someone can talk about the user experience side of it. We try to make it as clean as possible because let's say a user wants to get something done, right? We don't need to over feature the platform, right? We don't need to overdevelop the platform. We just need to go out there. We need to go out there and have people comment on it. And with something that is IP heavy, development heavy, that is a real burden on your manpower. You just don't have the time. You don't have the resources to get out in the market as soon as possible. You just have to spend the time to get to that level of development where you're comfortable. And that is, I think, the key problem with development first products. You have to be comfortable with your product. And the first and the foremost advice that I've gotten is that it doesn't matter if you're comfortable with your product, just ship it out. Let's test all the assumptions that you've made building that product. And that's what we try to do with this product. Samit can talk about the design side.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point, Cam. So that's what we did. Like Cam mentioned, it's really for like when you enter a market or like you build a product in a specific space, you really don't know. Well, you can make assumptions, but you really don't know what's going to work and what isn't going to work, right? So you got to find the quickest way to test that and get the feedback you want. So whether that means building designs of features, not even developing the features, but designs of the features, and then just showing it to people and be like, hey, does this work? Do you like this? Or it could be something as small as, even like sketching it out and showing it to people like, hey, does this make sense? Or pitching the idea to them, right? Having them imagine that, because the sooner you get feedback, the easier it gets for you to figure out what your users actually want, right? Because you could, like Cam said, you can spend like hours, you can spend days like building a product. But at the end of the day, it needs to be used by someone. And if they don't see the value in it, and if you don't know what the value of the product is early on, it's not going to go down well when you give it to someone, right? So that's the whole point. Especially with us, what we did was I don't want to sound too cocky here, but I'm pretty fast at like building designs and getting that out. So we understood that was something that we could do really quickly. So for me, I would just create like simple mock-ups, and then we would go to like students at universities and show them this and be like, hey, would you use something like this? Do you see something like this? It's useful. Of course, it's not like foolproof, because obviously it's not something that they can completely use, but it gives us enough feedback to be like, hey, this is a good route to go and actually test it out. So that's how we did it. And we keep doing that. Like we have like a community of students that, will put out designs and get feedback from them. Like something like as simple as recently we designed like a to-do list because somebody asked for it. And we're like, okay, some of us were like, I don't know if this is valuable. Some of us were like, this is valuable. So we're like, why don't we design it and test it out and get that feedback instead of spending a lot of engineering effort in creating it. So that's been, I guess, our way of figuring out what our users want. So yeah, it's been interesting for sure.
That's always good to hear. I think Vinay and I both agree that user-centered development should be like at the forefront of any development project. And I think some of these bigger, LLM projects, like, they don't really talk to users. They're just like, they're going to throw it out there and you get what you get. And so I think seeing you guys really take that user-centered approach and actually talking to the user, seeing what they actually want to use the product for, is great, especially with given the problems that you're trying to tackle. So that's really awesome.
I agree, and to adding on to what David just said, it is so tempting sometimes to just quickly ship out a feature, or just quickly make sure that you have developed something and just show it as a prototype versus having a design. It's so tempting to get it into the hands of the users, and it's very difficult to tame this excitement when you are especially in a hyper growth phase, right? When you are scaling rapidly, when you're adding more and more users, the excitement is always there every week to just say, hey, this is something new, just try this up. So I mean, once again, kudos to you guys for taking a very mature path, a very mature mindset in building a product. Again, we see that very little especially in a frenzy type market. So if you compare it to industry, expansions like the .com expansion, the .com boom, then the AI boom, which is happening right now. There was a blockchain boom, a crypto boom kind of thing. So if you compare, there is always heavy excitement to ship out features as soon as possible on an assembly line. So it's very interesting to hear your approach on this. So adding on to Samit's point of user specific design, I would love to understand your thoughts on how Penseum has helped a general student, a general professor, or any general human being who didn't have access to such a tool before versus has now. How has Penseum helped such a human do something in a more efficient way? Or do you have any success stories that you could share with us where Penseum has made a good impact on someone's life? And how did they feel? Like, we are very curious when AI goes into the hands of people who know almost nothing about LLM, text summarization, uh, open models, language models, nothing but just the actual use case. How has it benefited people?
Let's do I'll add something and then let's do an experiment together right here. And I think that will be the best. So essentially, in the past year, when LLMs became kind of widespread phenomenon, people started using it and started abusing it in a lot of different ways. Students needed to be responsible in its usage. Universities had to come up with guidelines that kind of made sense on how to use it. Educators had to do the sort of same thing. Everyone had to come up with a way to make sense on how to integrate AI into their work life and in their flow to boost this process, right? And I always say that I see future in a way that there are teachers and teachers who use AIs. It is not going to be AI who's going to be replacing the teacher, but rather AI and teacher are going to be working together. But let's do an experiment together. David, I want to ask you. I don't know when it was the last time you took a course, maybe an online course or what it was, right? Tell me your biggest challenge.
Cool. Okay. So I'm taking I'm doing like the Security Plus CompTIA certification right now. So I'd say like my biggest challenge is just it's a lot of material, and so just making my way. Like I think on like a high level, I think I understand kind of what most of the concepts are, but getting down into the details and kind of keeping all the related concepts separate in my mind is I think I tend to like generalize, like, yeah, I have a decent working understanding of like what this is or what this is, but I'll be doing practice questions and it's like, we'll ask about something specific and I'm like, it's either this or this, and so like my own for my own learning strategy, like I really have to like spend time digging through kind of the more granular details of every concept instead of just like reading through and saying, oh yeah, I kind of know what that is. I kind of know what that is. But,
Great. So a method that helps with that is called spaced repetition or even retrieval practice, meaning you sit down and try to get a concept and try to write about it, everything you know about it. And then what you can do, you can use the LLM to compare what you've written against a factual document where all the information is. Again, your source material would be that. Compare them and have it score it, right, based on different checklists and all that can be dynamically generated. Or retrieval practice. Maybe there are flashcards that are generated. Maybe there are questions that are generated. If you're answering a question wrong, you can source the material where you got the question wrong from. You can go back and review it. Instead of spending hours on end creating those notes for yourself, creating that process for yourself, it is making that process more efficient. It doesn't mean you shouldn't study. It means you're being more efficient with your time rather than stressing over where to study and when to study. When you have a tutor, that tutor assesses your knowledge and tries to teach you based on that knowledge base that you have. This is meant to do the same thing. Get wherever you go, whatever your problem is, you have an overall understanding. Sure, great, amazing. So now let's create a flow. Let's create a story that ties all those minute details, small details, to your overall understanding of the knowledge. So our platform does that. It is meant to do that. It is meant to be that, to address these sort of issues.
That is awesome. It's like in a lot of times in education, especially if you're in public education or in a big class, you don't have that like kind of individual attention that you're getting from like a tutor where they will actually tailor the approach of the learning to exactly what you need. And I think that's really wonderful that's kind of what your product is geared to do because that definitely I think would help a lot of people.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to add is that when you look at that, this is us in the first world, right? Where we have access to the best of the best, right? Obviously, there are better educational like resources out there, but we have it the best. But then when you look at those underserved communities, a lot of Iranians, a lot of, let's say, Brazilians, a lot of Turkish people, a lot of, even in our own country, a lot of underserved communities where resources in terms of education resources for students, educational resources for educators, the teachers, it's not as much. So there begs the question, well, what is the best way to get to these people, right? Help them. You can't be in every sort of course that we had in the past, someone had to stay out there and generate the course material, right? Make sure that the course material is good, create a question bank, so on and so forth. But we don't need to do that anymore, right? One person can be the person that goes through all this material and maybe check marks it rather than try to generate it. So we are being more efficient with our processes and making education, which is fundamental to our human progress, human evolution, a less daunting task. So that is the goal for projects such as ours. Obviously, we're not the only one in this sector, and so many people want to do the same thing. But I think I speak with everyone that is the intention.
That's awesome. I think with the development of more and more advanced AI systems, it's like the democratization of this technology is so important because if only the select few have access to it and have control over it, it's just going to lead to more and more disparity and quality of life and socioeconomic and everything. And so seeing what you guys are doing, where you're just helping people get access to this is wonderful, and I think is really important. So kudos to you guys.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add one other thing here. When you first started, it was early July. That's when we were cooking the idea, and before it started, and that is when I think Llama came out, Llama 7B, 13B, all these things came out. A couple of weeks after that, is Flash Attention 2 came out, and I was sitting down. I'm like, well, we have to get the Llamas. Llama had the 4K context, and we were like, well, if we can increase it to like 32K context, we could probably fit an entire book into it and try to have that material written in a different way, and so on. That is the future. That is when an AI would have enough context so that it could get an entire material from a course, make sense of it on its own, right? That is what AI should be doing. That is what we should strive for, right? Obviously, right now there are pieces and bits that we can, jerry-rig it together and make it work. But it wasn't at the time that we started developing this, it wasn't widely available. And then I started like doing the Flash Attention too. But again, it was me and a couple other friends that were working on different parts of it. I unfortunately could not develop such system in a short span of time. And I got to tell you, when you're at the forefront of those sort of technologies, there is no Stack Overflow that's going to help you. There's no one out there. There are probably like 10 different people working on the same thing all around the world and try to do something similar, but you got to wait another month or two for it to come out. But again, that goes back to whether you do it yourself or you use a general purpose, that is where you have to come from a business standpoint or weigh the consequences.
Absolutely.
That's so cool. Again, guys, just coming back to the question, maybe could you share with us some case studies or some examples where people have found this very exciting and some unique ways they have used Penseum, of course along the lines of what you guys had thought originally versus even outside of what you guys have thought. Like okay, I never thought Penseum could be used in this way. You know, I want to know if there were any such realization moments in the real users.
Yeah, for sure. I can speak to that. There have been, obviously we've had quite a few users on our platform, and there have been very interesting ways that people have been using Pensium. But again, what we realized, depending on the type of student that uses it, there's specific features that they like to use more, right? So take for example someone such as a med student. When we realize there's someone who they rely heavily on memorization, right? And learning like body parts, learning terms and things such as that. So for them, something such as flashcards was a very important piece for them, right? Generating those flashcards and getting those flashcards that they could practice with was very important to them. But let's say for another student, let's say someone who's doing more like, I don't know, question heavy, something like, calculus or something math related, for them, it's more practice questions. So using questions was more important to them. But overall, what we've seen in terms of success stories and, our users kind of messaging us, a lot of them, the general consensus is that it saves them a lot of time, right? Whether it's like for med students creating their own flashcards, like manually writing them, or using like Anki, is like quite a lengthy process. So they've saved a lot of time just getting sets and generating flashcard sets, or where it's with like economic students or calculus students, just like spending so much time just finding questions, they just have additional questions that they can practice with. And more than anything, also, getting like quick answers to their questions, right? A lot of them were like, it's like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. at night, and you don't want to email a prof, or if you can email a prof, they're not going to respond like the day of the exam or like right there and then. So just having like that chat that they can speak with that gives them that answer, it's just helped them a lot in that sense. But overall, I would think it would be mainly saving them time and then just making their studying more efficient. In terms of their studying, the actual studying and what they're learning, right? We instill like practices. So I don't think they're aware that they're learning in that specific sense, but hopefully they are. Yeah.
That's cool. So again, see, adding on to that, right? Especially when you are summarizing large textbooks. So I'm assuming this is like 100-page book, which I have an exam tomorrow. Let me summarize this using Pensium. So in general, in your experience, again, I don't want a definitive answer. If you can, that's nothing like it. But in your broad level experience, so the whole purpose of having 100 pages over there versus then summarizing that into 5 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs is going to result in some information loss. So do you think something like this happens? If that happens, how relevant is it for the student?
That is a difficult question. I gotta answer it in this way. Summarization by default means some software has to go there, understand what the topic is, try to retrieve information that are relevant, and get rid of information that are not relevant, right? There are open source machine learning frameworks, Spacey, NLK, all these different ones that had dictionaries of important concepts within different essentially educational streams. You could tap into them and say, well, I want all the important words that are from economics taken out of this paragraph that I'm giving you, right? It will do that. And you could just do a little bit of pre-processing, put relevant information into your LLM, and then try to retrieve information from it, right? But you can't do that for everything. You just have to have an open source machine learning framework that had all these, or package that had all these things. It is just not doable, right? Yep. So an alternative would be this. So why would we do that? Why would we do such thing? There are two reasons for it. If you're using a third party, you are worried about the token count, right? You want to have as less amount of tokens as possible. If you're using an open source ML model, then you're worried about rogue score, that is with the summarization score and so on, right? So you had to find a very beautiful balance between the both of them. Okay, you can run a pre-processing on the text that you have, get rid of all the abundant words like and, or, so on and so forth, right? Strip down the data a little bit, right? You can do further pre-processing with some sort of machine learning framework, maybe it's clustering, classification, and so on, right? But then again, you're losing a little bit of information. You don't want to summarize too much. You don't want to summarize too little. So again, what is the balance here? What we have found out is this. When you take a concept, you pre-process it, you run it through a machine learning package or a model, and try to get all those irrelevant data out, right? LLM does a very good job connecting, based on a little bit of context, connecting words to each other and creating a story around it based on that little context, right? So you summarize around the words that are derived from that machine learning model, right? And then you put it into the LLM, then you get the data from. So let's say a paragraph that is 1,000 words or around 1,000 words, you run it through the first pre-processing, 300 to 400 are out easily, right? All the punctuation and ors and so on, they're out, right? Not really important to the context. The LLMs are good to kind of figure out. So now you're looking at around 600 to 700 words. How do we get rid of that? You do another additional machine learning kind of vocabulary dictionary, and then you take another 70% out of it, right? So that now you're looking at pretty much half the tokens that you started with, right? Half of the token on 1,000 word, that means you've already saved half of your costs, right? So whether it's that or even your own model, you have to do some pre-processing. People think now LLMs have context, now you can just dump everything onto them. That is not the case. Pre-processing is what you need to think about, and that's what you need to be doing. It is faster, it is more reliable, and again, you can understand how much you're saving rather than trusting a model that is a general model and trusting it to kind of break down the process for you. You're in control when you do data pre-processing.
So again, adding on to that, right, I have a very quick user behavioral question. Maybe that's for Samit or for Kam. You guys take the call. But let me give you a scenario, okay? Especially after the advent of ChatGPT, the advent of DAL-E, like developers within my org or even designers within my org have gotten used to the quick way of doing things. So it's like, if you want to, so just for this podcast, right, for example, I could just go to ChatGPT, I could just type, give me 25 questions that I could ask Samit and Kam. These are their profiles. Just do your magic and give me 25 questions. And I ask that to you guys. Now, inherently, the argument is this would make me, there are two ways to look at this. So either this would make me lazy or this would make me efficient. Now, based on these arguments, what happens is generally with more and more AI generated content coming in the scene, I personally start lacking an empathy in the generated content. So it's like as you start writing code using Copilot or ChatGPT or OpenAI, various models, over time, you're going to run into a scenario which is not thought about because, again, the model has limited context compared to the human who is actually writing the code. So against this backdrop, I have a broad user behavioral question for you guys, and that is, do you think Penseum makes students lazy or efficient in terms of if they start looking at the summarized content as the absolute truth? Like, okay, this is my 300-page textbook. Let me run this through Penseum. I just do it at the start of the year. This is the absolute knowledge truth. the student knows all of that. He or she has gone through the summarized material. Do you think that's a risk? Because again, you have summarized a 300-page book into, let's say, 10 pages or 20 pages worth of info in total. So a student taking that as its universe and from there on treating that as the status quo, is this making the student lazy or efficient according to you guys?
I'll answer it, Samit, if you don't mind, because I have something in mind. I don't want to forget it. This is the biggest nightmare for technocrats. So technocrats believe in absolutes, right? It's either a 0 or 1. If the world was that, if I create, let's say, the guitar behind David's backdrop, if I created a guitar and it's the most perfect guitar and they can't be anything better, then I've done my job. Then I'm good, right? Unfortunately, the result of people's work is not that, right? So when you're talking about LLMs, right? Are LLMs perfect? By no means are they perfect. So there needs to be someone that needs to understand the data and the concepts well enough to create those LLMs, right? To make them better. The idea behind LLMs, so what are the LLMs based off of, right? Are those languages that are those LLMs built off of, are those perfect? Are those packages that are used in deriving those, are those perfect? Are the data points perfect? They're not, right? So now someone now has to have information on that to make that better. We go down the rabbit hole and then we come to an assembly language. We come to, I don't know, computer language, right? Zeros and ones. We look at the processes. Nothing in that process has come to its exact efficiency. So someone needs to be in that process along the lines, needs to understand information in so much depth so that that process can become more efficient and better, right? But what LLM has created now is another opportunity for more people to be involved, right? Instead of me being scared of saying, writing 2 lines of code, I can ask the computer to write 2 lines of code for me. Instead of me having to do that, I can focus on my own thing, right? So we talk about the laziness and students. I don't think when calculators were created, anyone liked them. People say, yeah, you're lazy, you have to do it in your head and you do this. It's like, we only have, just like LLMs, we have a short context in our head, short sort of information retrieval, right? Humans are amazingly terrible at storing data. Why should I put so much information trying to find routes in my neurons to make sense of all that when I can have something else do that for me, right? So would AI make students lazy? Would that make developers lazy? No, it makes them more efficient, it make them better, right? Something that would take the developer 40 hours to do, now it takes 20 hours. So now you have an extra 20 hours to do something else, to figure something else out, right? Now, instead of having asked the student to make some sense of this data and have a curriculum designed over how much it would take the student to understand them, now you can expand the curriculum, right? Instead of having it as limited as it was. Education has not changed in the last 100 years. It has barely scraped the surface. Now we have software engineering. Amazing, great. But everything, let's talk about electrical engineering, power systems. It has hit such efficiency that there are not that there is nothing, but there is limited amount of information that is added to that stream, right? Well, if people had more time, they would have thought more about the systems. We would have more efficiencies and creativity in that department. That is what new systems unlock. Obviously, there are people who are just going to be sitting at that point and they're not going to be getting any better, but we need all these people in different parts of these systems. People get better, more efficient, so that we can learn better in the same amount of time. I don't think people have gotten smarter all that much in the last 100 years, but they've definitely gotten more efficient at doing stuff.
Yeah, that's. I have a different perspective from what Kam has mentioned. My take on it is mainly to do with intent. It's like, well, from personal experience, and then just seeing how students generally are. It's when you go to university, when you go to school or anything of that sort, your intent generally is to learn, right? And but what happens is you hit a couple of roadblocks that push you to get into a certain mindset, right? So usually when you go, let's say, well, I'll talk from personal experience because we did engineering and STEM, right? So you go into, let's say, an engineering class such as, I don't know, like circuitry or something like that, right? Now, generally it's something interesting, like, okay, I want to know how circuits work, how things work, such as that. But then you're hit with, it's a difficult subject, right? It's not easy to comprehend. The material is thick, right? And the professor's not teaching it in a very like engaging manner, right? And what happens with that? Then generally you that intent to learn you lose that intent, right? And then you get into this mode where like you procrastinate because like, oh my god, I don't understand anything, or like you have a lack of confidence because like, oh my god, this is such a difficult subject, such a big book. You get overwhelmed with that, and then I feel like that's what pushes you to be lazy, because then your intent from changes from being like, I'm intending to learn, to being like, I'm intending to get better grades, or I just want to pass this course. And then that's when that switch happens, is okay, now I'm going to find the easiest way to do it, right? Because you're not intending to learn anymore, because you've been pushed to be more thinking of just passing the course. So that's kind of my perspective with it. And that's the whole point of what we're trying to do at Penseum, is start at the beginning so that generally you can still continue with that intent to learn, so that you don't get into that mood of just trying to get good grades or just trying to pass your course. So that's my kind of perspective.
I think we've all been there. That's awesome. You know, it's like I think both of you guys are right, but I think it's really interesting what you said. It's like that kind of moment of desperation is really when the switch is flipped in students' minds, and it becomes this: I just have to pass this course. I just have to pass this exam, and your intent kind of changes a little bit. But I also think it's interesting what Kam said. You know, and the question is like, is AI going to make people lazy? And so I would say, like, I hope so. You know, like I think, you know, that's the goal, right? Is like is that we're more efficient, and I think as long as we are mindful of the intent, I think that's on the whole it's a good thing. You know, it's like we, for the past, you know, couple hundred years, we define intelligence so much by how much somebody knows. And I think that where things are going now is, and on recall, I think where things are going now is more like we are becoming data librarians, and kind of more our ability to locate information is becoming more and more at the center. And I think you know, I think that's why when I see tools like this that are being applied in that way, it's exciting and very, very much where things are headed. So should we talk for a minute about some of the challenges that you guys have run into? And I know last time Vinay and I talked a lot about issues with, and you guys are doing education. We talked about mathematics as one of the areas that is just kind of a difficult subject when you're applying LLMs and AI tools. So you know, obviously there are challenges when you're using any LLM to do math. So instead of, you know, I don't think it'd be productive to ask, like, you know, do you guys think it's a problem? I think we all know that it's an issue. So what do you guys think, you know, is most exciting, or what do you guys think is the kind of direction that things are going to take with that? And do you see kind of a path to a tool like what you guys have put together being more useful in like the mathematics applications going forward? Like, what do you guys see as the path to that?
That is, again, that is another amazing question, but it is very difficult to answer. We've seen, I'm sure everyone here has seen how LLMs have developed from what they were in terms of mathematics, and to what they're capable of when you add relevant information, train them on relevant information for long enough. But then that becomes very difficult. I think it's very important for everyone to know, before we dive deeper, is that how you define logic for a human being is completely different on how you define logic for an LLM, and that is where the problem comes from. We are trying to create logic for LLMs in terms of mathematical context by just training them a lot, right? And just telling them what a logic can be, and so that when he goes back and looks at the data, it can make sense of that logic. Where do I think it will go is that we have to kind of rethink our approach in terms of explaining logic to computers, because LLMs versus computers, I guess, if we want to look at it that way, as we just learn more about these sort of systems, we kind of are learning more on how they try different, like how LLMs actually generate the information, generate the text. And the hybrid approach has been to this date is you get the LLM to call the right formula or its right function, right? So that the mathematical equations can be generated. But again, they're having trouble generating the code, right? But what I think the hybrid approach is going to be is LLMs are going to generate right code for them so that the computers can generate the result of that mathematical equation so that we can go forward. If we're going to go down the route of LLMs actually being trained on enough data to make logical decisions, that is going to be a long way to go. And I don't think that's the right way to do it. It's just making the LLMs better at generating code and having them better at executing them and not having runtime errors.
I think you're absolutely right. I think in the near term, you look at tools like Wolfram Alpha, I think is a good example where it actually has decent functionality where you can kind of put in any kind of mathematical expression and there is some kind of like recognition and interpretation that's going on there. And so, for you guys, I don't know if it looks like, oh, maybe if I think you're right that it's at this point, it doesn't really make sense for it to be like integrated into the LLM product. And, if you guys were going to do something for math, maybe it would be like a separate kind of like interface where you're like, okay, if you're doing math, here's your calculator or your, whatever you want to call it. Because those kind of like inherently structural problems, I think are just going to take a little more time to be worked out. And I don't know that the way that LLMs are performing the actual work that it really makes sense in that application anyway. So I just wanted to see what you would say, and I think I totally agree with what you said there.
That's so cool. I mean, in general, as a startup, as a product company, just to understand that we have some weaknesses, a certain technology cannot do certain things, is very good because then you can build around that context, which is very exciting. And to that, let's go to the last section of today's pod. And this section is going to be just quick questions to both of you. Again, David, if you have a separate perspective, just chime in. We are more than happy to listen to you anytime, any day. So just the only thing is, let's try to keep the responses as crisp as possible. So, I mean, the first question is, what do you guys believe is the biggest strength of Penseum right now in the form that it is currently?
I would say community.
Okay. Samit?
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. Our community. We have a good, strong community behind us. So it's always great.
That's awesome.
That's cool. So the next one is, what's some of the best business advice you've ever gotten and something that you have implemented in Penseum or you want to implement in Penseum and you guys want to see how the market responds to it?
For sure. I think the best business advice is about advice itself. For me, it's about accepting the right advice from the right people, right? Because I feel like everybody has an opinion on a bunch of things, but understanding what's the right advice for you to implement at that time is very important. So we've been trying to do that with Penseum. And of course, sometimes it's advice that you think it's right, but you try it out and it doesn't work. That's fine. It's understandable. So just making sure you get the right advice from the right people. That's my thing. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, so the next one is how do you see the role of AI taking a broader context in the education landscape? Like right now, we have talked about text summarization, then we have talked about making multiple choice questions. We have talked about making quizzes. So apart from that, where do you see AI coming into the education space? Something as low hanging fruits versus fruits that are very high up, which are something that could be addressed in the long term future.
I think most of things are low hanging fruit. And I would say from the low level at the student level to an institutional level, everything can be overhauled. They can be machine learning algorithms, LLMs, AIs implemented so that you can figure out if a student is struggling at the start of the semester, and people can be notified. Their journey can be changed. Everything from the student level to institution level can happen over 1 year. It's just a decision of these governments to put out bids for people, for companies like third-party companies to come and develop products for that market, which is education.
Yeah.
In a year, all can be fixed. I think the most important that can be fixed is figuring out if a student is struggling before that person starts to struggle.
Yeah.
That's cool. So, on top of this, I think I have two general industry level questions. It's perfectly all right if we spend more time on this, but I want to understand your context in this. So, see, first of all, I've seen OpenAI in their recent launch video coming up with customized versions of ChatGPT. Like you could have something with your own context and within a domain. So, point number one, do you think OpenAI poses a threat to business based on applications of LLM? So, there were businesses that are doing LLMs, open ChatGPT wrappers for healthcare. Again, I'm not calling you guys as a wrapper of OpenAI, but in general, do you think OpenAI ChatGPT poses a threat on applications of LLMs in particular?
I was having a conversation with a gentleman, and he was asking the same question, and I said OpenAI cannot keep up with generating as many features as they want, because then they're forgetting about what they have to do in the back and just getting the LLM better, because there's going to be fierce competition. And the next day, Sam Altman got fired, and it could not have come at a better time, because again, as much as these PR stunts of GPTs and all that are amazing, they have to focus on what they're doing as business, and that is just to create amazing LLMs. If your product is just a feature on top of OpenAI and you're not adding more things to it to separate yourself, then you are losing the battle yourself. Our company's entire motto is that we are a graphical interface for LLMs. We are not here to invent what LLMs are just to make LLMs amazing and great. We don't have the R&D budget for it. But we know that ChatGPT is not going to have a graphical interface that is going to be custom made for other business. At least that's what we assume.
Okay, that's a good answer. And I think just the last question to sum it all up. So again,
Go on.
see,
Go on.
at a backdrop, of course, the summit. So
Yeah.
of course, against the backdrop of big tech having potentially unlimited cloud budgets, having potentially terabytes or even petabytes of data in almost every industry, having the required engineering power, having the required infrastructure to build large scale AIs and take products to the market. So, in such a scenario, right, where AI is such heavy on the infrastructure side, on the data side, it seems like big tech has all of the pieces nailed together. So, why do you think a small company or a startup, right, someone who has an idea, even has a way to grow up the ranks and build a decent sized user base? Why can't just Microsoft or Google do it all? Do LLMs on Google Docs, LLMs on Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, even Windows altogether, the full file system. So why do you think small companies have a chance at making big?
Yep, that's a good point. I think mainly with small companies and why most of like small startups work out is because that they go super niche, right? So I feel like if you're a small company, if you focus on a segment that's well, maybe big tech is not focusing on, right? Because they try to go for maybe larger markets, right? So if you can start super niche, something that like nobody's looking at and nobody has, or I mean, maybe someone's looking at, but they haven't innovated in that space, right? I think that's what can help you succeed when you start as a small company is figuring out like a small market that's very underserved, and that's where you can get your start. At least in my perspective. I don't know what Cam's thinking.
The problem with big companies, in my opinion, is bureaucracy. As we have seen again and again, OpenAI, these companies kind of die from within when they get too big. It's just a reality of these big companies. They get lost in the sauce, as they say. In my opinion, going back to big tech, look at construction industry. Have you ever heard of a technology that has been implemented into in the construction industry and it has been amazing? Have you seen anything amazing with your house happening in the past, I don't know, however many years you've been alive? No, right? It's just that funny. The technology is out there, people just don't want to do it. So no matter how amazing a technology gets, it comes down to people's comfortability with being the pioneers in that industry. If people are not comfortable with it, no one will make a decision. Big tech, even big tech existing or not existing, if the industry doesn't want it, nothing's going to happen.
That's so cool. And that's a great answer to begin with. So, I mean, in the last 30 seconds, do you want to tell our audience something? How can they get on the Penseum platform? Of course, we'll share a link with our viewers after this. But, what do you think should be the next steps for our listeners to engage with Penseum?
I would say just create an account, whatever they're learning. Maybe that would be it would be a push for them to start learning that even more in depth. My entire philosophy around these sort of technologies and my technology is that it should make your life easier. If it's making your life harder, throw it away, delete it, and never open it again. If we were successful at doing that, I'm happy. If you're not, let us know why.
Cool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, go on the website and give us feedback. Tell us if you hate it. Tell us if you like it. I mean, feedback is the most important for us. So yeah, like Cam said, you can throw it away or you can keep it. It's up to you.
Sweet. I think we could do one more thing where we could just take a transcript of this full 1 hour podcast, maybe put it on Penseum and just give our listeners very important things to
ask them questions.
go.
What did Cam say in minute 30? But yeah,
Cool. So on that note, thank you so much to our listeners for spending an hour with us. We thoroughly enjoyed this. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Samit, talking to you, Kam, especially about the things that you are developing. I hope you start making a larger and larger impact in general on the lives of people. And just kudos, all the best. We would love to hear success stories from you. And just one thing before you leave, any milestone that you would like to achieve before we have another episode with you guys? Just any public commitment that you would like to take on before we meet again?
Put you on the spot.
I wanna have a hair transplant in the meantime.
You and me both.
Okay, that's cool.
From a business perspective, I want to hit 1 million users.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
once you have 1 million users, we are going to have you back.
Of course.
Well, that's a bet.